For this first one, what is the amplitude? Right? Someone else, what is the period? What is the period in this first one? What is the number in front of x? You don't see anything. So the formula is 2 pi over b. In this case, what is b? 1. 2 pi over 1, which is 2 pi. Okay? So remember, the formula, or the b in front of x changes the period, okay? The amount it takes for one rotation. Okay, what else is happening here? We have a new midline, which is called what? What direction are we moving in? Down 2. Okay, we have a vertical shift. Down 2. So our midline starts at -2. We count 3 above and 3 below to show our bookends. Okay? For sine functions, where do you typically start? Where do you start for sine functions? Always. Hands. Where do we start? Did we start the minimum, midline, or maximum? Eva? The midline. Good. Okay, so if I was to graph this, here is -2, which is my midline. Then my amplitude was 3, so from your midline you count 1, 2, 3 above, and then 1, 2, 3 below. Okay, so your graph has to fit between 1 and -5. Okay, since the period is 2 pi, okay, when we divide by 4, you have those even increments. So this is pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2. Okay, so we always start at our midline. Then where do we go from our midline? 1, then where? Midline, then where? Then where? Okay, good. So sine graphs. Midline, max, midline, min, midline. If there was a reflection, these two would do what? Reverse, right? Okay. So, for this next one here, what is our amplitude? Yep. Amplitude is always positive. Yeah. Just 1, but what is happening? Reflection. Amplitude is always positive. Okay. The negative means reflection. What is our midline? Zach? Careful. Nick? 0. Because your midline, remember, is plus or minus on the outside. Okay? And then what is the period? Second. It would be pi. 2 pi over 2 gives you pi. Now, what would your increments be here? What would they all go up by? What do we do once we have a new period? What do we do? Nick? You divide by 4. Okay. Anytime you have the new period, to find even increments, you divide by 4. So you start with pi over 4, then you add a 4th, pi over 2, then 3 pi over 4, and pi. Has to be consistent. Okay. So we know our amplitude is 1. Okay. Sine functions again. Start at the midline. But pi over 4, where would I be? Yeah. Careful. negative 1. Okay, pi over 2, 3 pi over 4, and then pi. 0, and that's what the graph is. Okay, so we covered a lot last class in terms of understanding transformations. Okay, understanding transformations. What we did not see is, and you will not have to graph this. Okay, someone tell me one thing that's changing. Yep, one thing. Yep. Okay, midline is 2, so up 2. Someone else. What else is happening? Go ahead, Porter. Amplitude of 3, which is our vertical stretch. Now, what would this mean? Yeah, Kennedy. We are going to the right pi units. Okay? So this is still the same. Inside parentheses. You will not have to graph it, but you will have to identify it. Okay? So x minus pi, you are moving to the right pi units. What would happen if it was x plus pi? Left. Okay? So that has not changed from functions. Right? It just looks a little different because we're dealing with radians instead of numbers. Okay? Make sense? All right. So now, if you could turn to page 6. Okay. If you could turn to page 6, I want you to take a minute to fill out the chart for cosine. Okay? Take a minute to fill out the chart for cosine, please. Looking at cosine, cosine of 0 is what? Stefan? Careful. Cosine of 0 is 1. Okay, you're looking at the x values. What is the cosine of pi over 2? Camilla? 0. Cosine of pi? 3 pi over 2? 2 pi. Okay, so cosine, we are now starting at 1. Okay, pi over 2, we are at 0. Pi, we are at negative 1. 3 pi over 2, we are at 0. 2 pi, we are at 0. 1, sorry. Okay, so same thing applies here. Okay, for your parent function. Okay, your midline, which is the center of the graph, is still equals y equals 0. Okay, your amplitude from the midline to the maximum point is still 1. Okay, and the period for the parent function is 2 pi. So everything is still the same, just the shape of the graph. Okay, and instead of starting at the midline, we're now starting at the maximum. Okay, so let's look at our transformations. Okay, when we have an A, and that extra F, I don't know what that is. Okay, so for cosine, what is our amplitude for g of x? Nick? Good. Our amplitude is 1/4. Is our midline still 0? Yes. Okay. So from our midline, we count 1/4 and we subtract 1/4. Okay. Now cosine, where are we starting? At 1/4. Pi over 2, where are we? 0. Pi, where are we? Negative 1/4. Then where? And then 1/4. Okay. Now for number 2, what is our amplitude? 2. So our midline is still the same. Our amplitude is 2. Where are we starting? 2. Then pi over 2, where are we? 0. Pi, where are we? 3 pi over 2. And 2 pi. Good. Okay. All right. So for number 3, what is our amplitude? 3, but what's happening? There is a reflection. Okay, again, midline is still the same. So from here we count 3 above, 3 below. Okay, so for cosine, where would we start first? Camilla? -3, excellent. Then pi over 2, 0, pi, good, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi, excellent. Okay, so one thing to keep in mind that you might want to jot down here, this starts at your maximum, midline, minimum, midline, max. For those of you that want some hints as you go along, okay, for this, midline is always the center. It's, well, for sine, if you wanted to put in the chart for sine, you would do midline, minimum, midline, minimum, midline. Okay? We could go back after to fill that in. All right. Now when we have a vertical shift, okay? So what is changing in number 1? The midline, what is it? Okay. So our midline is y equals 3. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Here is our new midline. What is our amplitude? 1. So since our amplitude is 1, we count. 3 plus 1 is 4. 3 minus 1 is 2. So our graph has to fall in between 2 and 4. All right. For cosine, where am I starting? Be careful. 4, our highest y value. That's where we're starting. 4. Pi over 2, where would I go? Pi. 3 pi over 2. And 2 pi. Good. Okay. Try number 2 and 3. Try number 2 and 3. Okay. For number 2, what is our midline? Zach? -1. Awesome. Okay, what is our amplitude? Nick? 1. So 1 above, so the highest point would be 0. The lowest would be what? -2. Okay. For cosine of x minus 1, where are we starting? Yeah. 0. Good. Pi over 2. Where are we? -1. Pi. 3 pi over 2. And 2 pi. Excellent. Good. All right. For number 3, what is our midline? Go ahead, Nick. -2. All right. What is our amplitude? 1. So -1's the highest. -3. Start here. Okay, that is our function. How many of you got both of those correct? Good, good, good. Okay, so now, like we did with sine, we are going to take the A, our amplitude, and our vertical shift, okay, and combine them together. So, we'll do the first one together. You guys will try number 2. So what is our midline in number 1? 1. Okay. Now, what is our amplitude? 1, but what is happening? So what is our highest y value? So we add 1, and what's our lowest? 0. Okay. Where would we start? 0, 1, or 2? 0, because of reflection. Good. Pi over 2, where would we be? 1, 3 pi, pi, sorry. We're at 2, 3 pi over 2, and then 0. Good. All right. Try number 2. All right, for number 2, what is our midline? Camilla? -2 is our midline. Okay, what is our amplitude? Hannah? 2. Okay, so from our midline, we count 2 above. 1, 2, so our highest value is 0, highest y value. What would be our lowest? -4, good. So, where am I starting? 0, -2, or 4? -4. 0, excellent. Pi over 2. Where would I be? -2, pi, 3 pi over 2, 2, and then 2 pi. Good, thanks. Awesome. Okay. Questions, comments, concern. Same thing, right, as what we did last class. However, we're starting at a different place. Yes? That's fine. Yeah. No, so for number 3, our midline is where? 2. So this is 2. What is our amplitude? 1/2. So our highest point would be 2.5, and our lowest would be 1.5. Okay? Yes. You're gonna see too on like a normal scale. This is writing it in for everybody. But you are going to see on a regular graph, if you're given a graph, you're going to fill in the y-axis, and this is fine. Okay? So here we are starting at 2.5, then 2, 1.5, 2. Okay? And like I showed you guys on at the end of class on whatever day it was, Friday, it's hard to see the differences, okay, on these scales because we're drawing a lot of it in, right? On the calculator, you could really see the difference when there's a period change, which we'll get to shortly. If there's a stretch or shrink, you'll see that more clearly on the calculator, okay? Then actually drawing in our y-axis, okay? So for those of you that weren't here, I'll show you that in a little bit, okay? So the last thing in terms of transformations before we write equations is when we have a period change. So when one full rotation changes. We're used to one full rotation, one cycle on the unit circle is from 0 to 2 pi, okay, or negative 2 pi to 2 pi, and it just keeps going. Same pattern. When you have a number in front of x, that is what changes the period, okay? So the formula is to change the period 2 pi over b, okay? The b value is in front of the x, all right? So we take 2 pi, divide by 2, because that's our b value, okay? The new period is pi units. So one full rotation will take pi units, okay? So we will end this cycle at pi. However, to find these even tick marks here, we have to, for the x scale, divide by 4. That always is the same. So you take your new period and you divide by 4. Okay? So that's where we're starting, pi over 4. So each of these, you're adding 1/4. Hence, when we went through the unit circle, the patterns come back again. Okay? So pi over 4, then 2 pi over 4, which reduces to pi over 2. Then 3 pi over 4, and then we finish with pi. Okay? What is our amplitude of this function? 1. What is our midline? Nick? 0. So our midline 0, and our amplitude is 1. So for cosine, where am I starting? 1. Then pi over 4, 0. Pi over 2, 3 pi over 4, 0. Okay? Okay. So when you see this on your calculator in a little bit, you're going to see one full rotation is cut in half. Okay, you finish in half the time. All right? So number 2, what is our b value? 1/4. So we have 2 pi divided by 1/4. How do I get a fraction out of the denominator? What do we do? Yeah, right. Yep, excellent. We multiply top and bottom by 4. So the new period for this function is 8 pi. Okay. And again, to find the x scale, we take 8 pi, divide by 4, we get 2 pi. So each of these increments are going to go up by 2 pi. So 2 pi plus 2 pi is 4 pi, then 6 pi, and 8 pi. Okay. What is our amplitude in number 2? 1. What is our midline? 0. Where am I starting? 1, then 2 pi. 4 pi, 6 pi, and 8 pi. Good. Okay. All right. Questions? Okay. If you turn to the next page. And find where these two graphs are for number 2. Okay. When you need to write equations, okay, for these functions, you always start from the y-axis. Okay. The reason is I have you start there is because you could come up with a variety of sine, cosine graphs for this. Okay. There's multiple. It depends on the shifting. So I want you to always start at the y-axis no matter what. Okay. So if I start at the y-axis, what type of function do you think we have? Cosine, y. Good. We have a cosine graph because it's starting at the highest point. Okay? According to this. So, what do we think the period is from start to finish? So if we're starting here, one full rotation ends where? Careful. Yeah, Chris. What was it? Careful. Yeah, Liam. Pi over 2, because think of cosine. If we're starting at the maximum, one full rotation should end at the maximum, correct? Okay, so from here to here is one rotation. Okay, so the period is pi over 2. Okay, now, can anyone guess, just by looking at it, what our midline is? Stefan? 0, okay? And if our midline is 0, what is our amplitude? Nick? 2, okay? Another way to find that out, okay? Another way to find that out. Start from the bottom, and you count. 1, 2, 3, 4, okay? From min to max, you count. There's 4, right? When you divide by 2, we get 2. That's going to be your amplitude. Then from your maximum, you subtract 2. That's your midline. Okay, does that make sense? Technically, a lot of you will be able to see it, okay? But there's some chances where you have a different midline where it might be a little off, okay? So now, if I wanted to create this equation, okay, we have y equals 2 cos, we'll get to b in a minute, and we have nothing plus or minus because our amplitude is 0, okay? So if our period is pi over 2, yeah, it is. Amplitude is 2. Okay. Our amplitude is 2, our midline is 0. Okay? So, we need to find that b value. What formula includes the b? 2 pi over b. But we know our period, right? So it's the period equals 2 pi over b. Well, if we know our period, in order to find b, pi over 2 equals 2 pi over b. We set up an equation. How do we solve for b? What's the first thing? Yeah. Cross multiply. If I have pi times b, and then I have 4 pi, how do I get b by itself? Divide both sides by pi, and what happens on the right-hand side? 4 pi divided by pi. Cancels the pi out, so my b value is 4. Okay, so looking at it again, this is the formula. Some of you are looking at me like I had 10 heads. So pi over 2 is your period, equals 2 pi over b. In order to solve for b, we need to cross multiply. So pi times b equals 4 pi. We need to find that b value for this equation. So we divide by pi, b equals 4. Okay, that finds your b value front of x. Okay, makes sense? All right, let's look at b. Start from the y-axis. What function do I have? What function? Two people know what function I have. Okay. Camilla? Sine. Why? Why did we choose sine? Good. Okay. So we have our sine function. Because we're starting not at the highest point, we're starting at our midline. Okay? Or what it looks like the midline. One complete rotation happens when? Yeah, Zach. Pi. Good. Because remember, sine, start at the midline, end at the midline. Okay? What is our amplitude? Yep. 3. What is our midline? What's the midline? Yeah, kind of. 0. Okay. Use that information to create your equation. Go ahead. Mhm. 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 You got it. Yeah. Okay. It's very. You're gonna see very similar. It's just remembering the sine function. Okay.
Do you ever have to use like your calculator to use like cosine, or is it kind of just like the numbers?
The numbers around the circle. It's always going to be that -1, 0, and 1 to always start, and then if the amplitude changes, it's just you're multiplying your y values by that. So it's very similar to functions. Okay. All right. For b, what is our equation? Go ahead, Mia.
Y equals 3 sine, and then like x.
Excellent. Good. Y equals 3 sine of 2x. How many of you guys got that? Okay. Yeah, Hannah.
I'd have to like set it over so.
Okay, so it's pi equals 2 pi over b. Okay, we cross multiply because this is over 1. Okay, so pi times b and 1 times 2 pi. Divide by pi. These cancel, cancel. B equals 2. Okay, all right. Any questions? Okay, your homework, I just want to make sure the numbers are correct. Okay, you should have done on page 7, 1A through C. Okay, you should have that completed. Okay, on page 8. Okay, and we're going to circle all together so there's no D, E, and F. Okay, you already did 3A. Well, now 3B on page 8. Okay, and then on page 9, D and F. Okay, on page 10. Okay, just the more practice, the better. one A, B, D, and F, and then 2A and B. Okay? So, those of you that were not here, please make sure you complete the homework from last class. It's on Google Classroom, and it's also highlighted here. Okay? For those of you that were not here, we did 1A through C here. Okay? Then the rest are circled. 3A, 3A, I did that one, and C and E. Okay, so pretty much the whole, that first practice. Yeah. You're identifying it, you're not graphing it. So, like E, okay? You're identifying. The phase shift means left or right. Okay? So, good point. Thank you, Camilla. Phase shift means left or right. Okay? Phase shift means left or right. Okay? Phase shift means left or right. For D, there's no phase shift. Yeah. Yep. Right pi. Right pi, kind of like what we did with functions anyway, where we would say right, but it would be a number. Okay.